Hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. If you're in the process of applying to grad schools or you plan to apply in the near or distant future, then you may or may not know that one of the documents you're gonna have to submit with your applications is a CV. I say may or may not know because I have no shame in saying that before I started my master's program, I had absolutely no clue what a CV even was. I didn't know how to create one, I didn't know how to format one, I didn't know what was supposed to be on it, like none of that. And so when I was applying to PhD programs the first time around, when I had also applied to the master's program that I ended up in, I just applied using my regular resume that I had been using to apply for other jobs that I had been working within like those years. And I came to find out that in the world of academia, that is a big no-no. I didn't know no better. Like I said, I didn't have anyone around me to teach me these things. I didn't know there was a difference between a resume and a CV. And so I just didn't know any better. But when applying to grad school programs, you will need a CV. And for clinical psych programs specifically, there are a couple of areas that you will probably want to emphasize. But first, I want to explain what a CV even is because like I said, I didn't know. And I don't want to assume that if you're watching this video that you know what a CV is already. CV stands for Curriculum Vitae. So a CV is intended to present a full history of your academic credentials. This is unlike a traditional resume, which is actually intended to provide a very concise picture of your skills and qualifications that are tailored to whatever specific position you're applying for. And so a CV is generally longer than a traditional resume. While a resume is generally like 1 to 2 pages maximum, your CV can really be as long as necessary. So if it takes you 5 pages to list all of your academic credentials, then by all means use 5 pages. The format of a CV is also pretty different than the traditional resume. On a resume, after you list your name and your contact information, you would typically list your objective or your skills, and then you would go into your work history and your accomplishments and acknowledgements, and then you would leave your education for either last or somewhere near the end. For your CV, you will always list your education history first after your name and contact information, and then you'll follow that with a number of different sections, the arrangement of which will depend on whatever is most relevant to what you're applying for. And so that is what we're gonna go over today. Okay, so for the purposes of everything that I'm going to explain in this video, I'm following a CV template that I got from a workshop that I attended while I was in my master's program. From what I know, just more generally, I think the general like widely accepted format of both resumes and CVs tends to change over time. Considering that I got this template just like a little less than 2 years ago, I'm assuming that it's still like an acceptable format. I don't know how often the acceptable formats change, but I'm assuming this is still okay to use. I don't really know who determines when formats are no longer usable. That's weird. That's real weird, but yeah. I'm assuming this is still usable. So yeah, I guess we'll just start at the top of the CV. So obviously at the top of the first page, you're gonna wanna put your name, your contact information, so your address, your email, and your phone number. When I was in this workshop, we were also told that you could include your website and or your LinkedIn account if you have one and it's relevant, but those aren't required. Also a note, your address is also optional in a way. My address isn't on any of my CVs that I send out, but I know some people like to include it. So like I mentioned, on a CV, after your name and contact information, your first section will always be education. For this section and every other section to follow, anything you list will be listed in reverse chronological order. So you'll start with the most recent and then move to the oldest. So for education, you want to start with your most recent degree, If you're in school, then you'll start there. And you'll want to list the name of your school, the city and state, the degree you've received from that institution or the degree you're currently working on. And then on the right-hand side of the paper, you'll want to list either your graduation year or your expected graduation year. Listing your GPA is entirely optional. If you're applying to programs that have like a minimum GPA cutoff and you want them to just very quickly see that you have a GPA above that cutoff, then you can include it. But if your GPA isn't the greatest, then I wouldn't. Personally, I graduated undergrad with a 3.3, but in my master's program, I had a 3.9. And so when applying to PhD programs the second time around, I very much included my 3.9 and very, very happily left off my 3.3. And then under each institution, you can also list any awards you received, any papers that you authored or co-authored that were published. But you'll want to be very strategic in what you list here, because there is another section that you can list later on that will be more comprehensive of everything that you've done. So just make sure that any awards or publications that you include in the education section are ones that are, one, super relevant to whatever you're applying to, and two, are things that you can talk about in depth if you were to get an interview. Also, under each institution, you can include selected coursework. And so here you may want to list a few courses that you took at these institutions that are most relevant to whatever you're applying for. You can also put selected coursework in its own individual section, but you don't have to. But if you want to do that, then you would just put that section immediately after the education section. So after education, the next section you want to include, if you aren't going to include a selected coursework section, is awards and honors. You'll only want to include this as a section if you have more than like 1 or 2 awards to list. So 3 or more. If you only have 1 or 2, then you'll probably just want to list those under their respective degrees in the education section. And if you don't have any awards or honors to list, that's perfectly fine. Just omit the section completely. No one will know. But under the awards and honors section, you'll want to list things like recognitions, fellowships, things like that. The next section after that will be either one of 2 sections. If you're applying to grad school programs, then your next section is going to be either research or clinical experience. If you're applying to things like teaching assistantships and research assistantships, then your next section is going to be teaching experience or teaching related experience. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, so I'll get to that when I do. So your research experience and your clinical experience can each be their own individual sections. But if you have experience that overlaps in both areas, then you can combine them into one section called clinical research. But whichever one you decide to use will depend on wherever you have the most experience or the most relevant experience. If you don't have any experience in one or the other, then you would just omit that section. So if you have research experience but no clinical experience, omit clinical. If you have clinical but no research, omit research. Everything you include on your CV is intended to highlight your experience and your accomplishments, not to highlight anywhere that you might have deficits, if that makes sense. So if you don't have anything to go under a specific section, just completely omit that section altogether. But for research experience or clinical research experience, for any of those sections, you'll want to include the name of the organization or company that you were working with or for, the city and state they were located in, and again, on the right-hand side, your dates of employment. Underneath that, you'll want to include what position you held, and then you'll want to list a maximum of 4 bullet points per position. But within these 4 bullet points, you'll want to make sure that you present yourself in a way that shows that you had an actual function to serve, or that you achieved accomplishments while in this position. And so you'll want to do that by making sure that these bullet points showcase very valuable skills. So you'll want to include anything that shows that you did something that someone else might not have been able to do. For grad school applications, how important research or clinical experience is solely dependent on how much experience you have in each of those areas. Most programs do like to see that you have some form of experience in either or both of those areas. But if you're weaker in one area, it is completely okay as long as you kind of make up for it in the other. Or if you have an equal balance of both. For example, if you have a lot of research experience, but maybe a little bit or even no clinical experience, like that shouldn't be a problem. Or vice versa, if you have a lot of clinical experience, but very little or no research experience, it shouldn't really be a problem. If you have a little bit of experience in both, like you've dipped your toes in both, then that's also okay. What will work against you is if you have absolutely no experience in either. At that point, you'll want to start thinking about ways you can get some experience before you submit applications. So the next section to follow that up will be teaching experience or teaching related experience, unless, like I mentioned, you're applying to teaching assistantships or research assistantships. If you are, then that section would have come before the ones I just spoke about. But if not, then it can follow into the order that I'm kind of going in. So it's very similar to the research and clinical experience sections. Your dates of employment will be on the right-hand side, all aligned. And then for each position, you'll want to list the organization or institution, their city and state, the position you held, and then a maximum of 4 bullet points for each position. Again, you'll want to make sure that these 4 bullet points present you in a way that show that you had an actual function to serve and that you weren't just like, let's say, a TA who attended lectures and then never did anything else. Don't just include things like emailed students or like attended lectures, you know, like embellish a little bit. Y'all know how to talk yourselves up, yeah? Everyone knows how to make themselves look better. So teaching experience or teaching related experience when it comes to applying to grad school programs isn't really all that important. It's more so important once you're already in a program and you happen to want to be a TA, or if you're in the PhD program and you want to be a teaching fellow, then you'll need some teaching experience. But other than that, it's really not necessary. So in addition to the sections that I've already talked about, there are a few more sections you can include that are entirely optional. Really, you'll want to include these sections if maybe you have things that you want to highlight that you haven't already highlighted in the other sections, or if you have something that falls under one of these sections that will make you stand out on your application, or if you might be a little bit weaker in another area, then you can include one of these sections in a way if you feel like it might compensate for that. But these next few sections are completely optional, and if you don't have anything to list under them, again, it's fine, just completely ignore them altogether. So the first completely optional section is publications. If you have publications that you didn't list in the education section, you can include them here. Your dates of publication, your year of publication will be on the left-hand side aligned, and then for each year, you would just list the citation in APA format. So the next optional section is conferences. In this section, you can include conferences, workshops, talks, but you'll only want to include those that you actually presented at. You don't want to include anything that you just went to as an attendee, or that you went to but didn't present. And then again, like the publication section, the year of the conference will be aligned on the left-hand side. And then for each year, you'll just list the title of the conference, the city and state the conference was held in, and then the citation of whatever you presented. You can also label this section a little bit differently depending on what you're including. So you can call it conferences, but you can also call it workshops, or you can call it invited talks, or if you were a part of a team that organized a conference, you can label it conferences organized. So any of those will work. And then the last optional section will be other experience. And again, you can kind of label this whatever you want that is most relevant to whatever you're going to be including in this section. You can label it other experience, or you can label it leadership experience or academic service, just whatever is most relevant to whatever you're actually going to include in the section. So the very last section that you'll want to include on your CV, no matter what other sections you decide to include, the very last section you will always include are references. Unlike a resume where you probably wouldn't include your references on the actual resume, on your CV, you will most likely include 3 references. And these references are usually going to be people from whom you've already or will be requesting recommendation letters or reference letters. So for each reference, you'll want to list their name and their position or their title. If they work at a school, then you'll want to list their department and their institution, along with the address of where they work, and then any contact information you have for them. And then that's it. You are now done with your CV and can send it off into the world to be judged. Yikes. But no, yeah, you're done with your CV and you can now send it off with your other application materials. And yeah, hopefully that was all helpful. I know it was a lot to take in. I'm probably gonna upload the template to my Google Drive and then include the link in the description, just so that like you'll have easy access to it to be able to use the template. So yeah, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, subscribe, and click that notification button to make sure you don't miss my next upload, and I will see you in my next one.